All right. Good morning, everybody. It is good to see you all today. It is nice to get together for our Sunday school class. I am glad to be here too, especially like considering where we are and dealing with overcoming weaknesses and kind of seeing. We've been watching how David's failure in one area, let's call it, we've seen in one area. We're going to see how it's in both his areas of his life. His two big failures are going to lead to catastrophic results. And I've just been, I just spent a good number of days with my family and with my uncle's funeral yesterday. And I saw a cousin yesterday I haven't seen since 1990 because of a rift in the family. And they have, that side of the family cut themselves off. My uncle's children completely cut themselves off from certainly from his family, me included, like my mom, his sister, and then her parents or his parents. And so yesterday I saw that one cousin I haven't seen in about 30 years. I saw my cousin that I saw for the first time 2 years ago, before like would have been 30 years. I just happened to find her on Facebook and reached out to her, and we started chatting a bit, and we visited together when we were on vacation. Sandy and I were on vacation. And then I had one cousin that didn't attend, like his own father's funeral. And it's because of things like this where our actions impact other people's actions, and things are done and said. I shouldn't say that can't be taken back, because the taken back is the non-issue. It's the won't be apologized for, where pride just gets in the way. And it was, I met my cousin's children yesterday. Here they are. They're like 27 years old, 25 years old, and I'm just meeting them for the first time. It was strange. There were more people yesterday. I'll tell you what's neat. My parents' church is really neat. There were more people from their church yesterday out to support my mom than there were from our family. It was pretty neat to see so many people there. Really loving church. So we're going to pick up today as we continue looking at David. And we're going to open up with a word of prayer, and then we'll do a quick review. Gracious God, we thank you so very much for today. We thank you for your amazing love for us. We thank you for your graciousness. We thank you for your work in our lives. God, we thank you that you provide us with protection and safety. You give us hope. And Lord, we can focus on you. We can follow you. We can serve you. And with you, Lord, we can ride through any storm. We thank you so much for today and for this time. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so we have been following David for quite some time. We saw David's early successes, and now we're looking at how some of David's personal issues have created a huge impact in his family. So we spent some time looking at the issue of David and Bathsheba, and how David's love for the ladies, or that David liked the ladies, ended up leading him into some pretty serious sin. And then over the past, I think, 2 weeks, we've been looking at David's inability, or I would call it, maybe he has a fear of man, and his fear of man creates in him an inability to hold those that are close to him accountable. If you remember back to when Nathan the prophet comes and confronts David, right, and tells him this parable about a man who has this little ewe lamb that he loves, and he's raised it like it's a child, and then a wealthy man comes along and takes his little ewe lamb and serves it up as a meal when he has a guest coming. That David has this outrage, and he says such a thing should not happen in Israel, right? Such a thing should not happen in Israel, and that man has to pay back X number over and over again. And he just like right from the king. Imagine right from the king, an order comes down to you, whomever you are, that you need to make restitution. Like that's a huge level of judgment, really, really huge. But David does nothing when Joab kills. Now I forgot his name. His name went out of my head just like that. Saul's former general, and not Abishai. Abishai was Joab's brother. Abner kills Abner. Kills Abner. David does nothing. Says nothing. Doesn't hold Abner accountable. And then when Amnon rapes Tamar, what does David do? Nothing. Where's his outrage over a ewe lamb? This is his daughter. And then when we've seen that Absalom decides to wait 2 years and then kill his brother, right, his half-brother, his older half-brother. And how did David respond to that? He did nothing. So we're going to continue following this account and see how these events with Absalom start to pair out. So why don't we look into 2 Samuel chapter 14. Excuse me. And we're going to be looking at verses 21 to 23. So Joab has now come. So what's interesting is David does not hold Joab accountable, but Joab is going to hold David accountable, right? Joab of all people, right? Guy who murders his counterpart and makes some pretty raunchy decisions as well. So then Joab, this is 2 Samuel 14, beginning at verse 21. Then the king said to Joab, behold now, right? 21. Yep. I grant this. Bring back the young man Absalom. And Joab fell on his face to the ground and paid homage and blessed the king. Today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, my lord the king, in that the king has granted the request of his servant. So Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. And the king said, let him dwell apart in his own house. He is not to come into my presence. So Absalom lived apart in his own house and did not come into the king's presence. Now, in all Israel, there was no one so much to be praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. And when he cut the hair of his head, for at the end of every year he used to cut it, when it was heavy on him, he cut it. He weighed the hair of his head 200 shekels by the king's weight. There were born to Absalom 3 sons and 1 daughter, whose name was Tamar. She was a beautiful woman. So Absalom lived 2 full years in Jerusalem without coming into the king's presence. Then Absalom sent for Joab to send him to the king, but Joab would not come to him. And he sent a second time, but Joab would not come to him. Then he said to his servants, see, Joab's field is next to mine, and he has barley there. Go and set it on fire. So Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Then Joab arose and went to Absalom at his house and said, why have your servants set my field on fire? Absalom answered, Joab, because I sent word to you, come here that I may send you to the king to ask, why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me to still be there. Now, therefore, let me go into the presence of the king, and if there is guilt in me, let him put me to death. Then Joab went to the king and told him, and he summoned Absalom. So he came to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. All right, so what does David decide to do with Absalom? And just we skipped a little part of reading that's a little convoluted. Joab finds a woman and sends her in to tell a made-up story about, it's almost like copying Nathan's story, a made-up story about this son that's gone and in hiding because of a death or murder in the family, and she wants him to come back and all this kind of stuff. And so the king kind of talks to her, and then she says, you know what, I'm just going to tell you the truth. And she tells him why she's there. And so then he turns to Joab and says, all right, fine, let's do it. That's kind of where we pick up. Let's bring Absalom back. So what does David decide to do with Absalom? Yes, bring him back to Jerusalem and put him under house arrest. So he's been living in Geshur, in the city of Geshur, which is outside of Israel, in reasonable freedom. It's probably a vassal state to Israel. He's living outside of Israel in reasonable freedom. David says, come on back home, and then puts him on house arrest. And he's there for 2 years. I'm not sure if the text tells us how long he lived in Geshur. I don't believe it does. Unless I've missed it. So think about this, right? Amnon rapes Tamar. Absalom waits 2 years. 2 years, I believe, waiting on the king's justice, at least for a time. And then when he sees that his father won't do anything, he decides he's going to take justice into his own hands, invites all of his brothers, including Amnon, to come to his house for a party, or out to the fields, to where they shear the sheep for a big party. And when he does, he has his servants kill his brother, and all the rest flee home. And then Absalom, realizing that, this could be a problem, he heads to Geshur and goes into hiding in Geshur. We don't know for how long. 3 years. Oh, thank you. 13:30. Okay, yeah. 3 years. Okay, thank you for catching that. Thank you. 3 years. So 2 years after Tamar's rape, 3 years in Geshur, 2 years under house arrest where his father won't even come see him. Quick math, how long has it been since the original crime? 7 years. 5 years since Amnon was killed. 7 years since Tamar's rape. And David has yet to bring justice. Isn't that something? Now, I'm glad I've never had to be in this kind of position. I've known families that have found themselves in a position where one child has sexually assaulted another. And it's heart-wrenching for them how they're going to deal with it. And I don't know what the right way is. And I'm glad I don't have to figure it out. But I can tell you ignoring it is the wrong way. Right? David ignored it. Because if he were to follow through, he was going to have to hold Amnon accountable. Amnon is close to him. David can't hold him accountable. Can't do it. And the result is, I would say, a worse sin happens, right? You guys ever seen this before in your life where something doesn't go right and then the counterbalance to it is something even more wrong, right? Which makes it not a counterbalance at all. How long have we said two what? 2 wrongs. 2 wrongs don't make a right, right? 2 wrongs don't make a right. We've said it. We say, it's a regular little proverb or anecdote here. I guess it's a proverb in our own culture that quite obviously has roots back to events like this, and who knows how many events and how many different cultures, right? Where we all, I think we can agree, 2 wrongs don't make a right. And yet, what do we persist in doing? If somebody wrongs us, if somebody hurts us, we tend not only to wrong them back, but we tend to want to wrong them back in a bigger way so that they would not dare wrong us again. While we say two wrongs don't make a right, our cultural norm is to do exactly trying to make two wrongs make a right. And when I go back and wrong the other person more than they wronged me, or that they wronged someone that I love who wronged me back because I wronged them, then what happens? Right? Don't we just keep on one-upping it? And so Absalom has one-upped it over Amnon. And now Absalom is festering. I believe he's festering in two things. He's festering, number one. Well, what do you think he's festering in? Number one, anger that David did not do anything to Amnon after Tamar's rape. He did not bring justice. What else? Right. Right. He himself has not been brought to justice. Absalom knows that what he did was wrong. It was wrong. But no one else was going to do it, so he did it. No one else was going to hold Amnon accountable. And so Absalom held Amnon accountable. Whether or not the law says that a person who commits rape is to be put to death, the responsibility is never to fall upon the individual to be the judge, jury, and executioner. The responsibility falls upon the community, wherein there is a judge, there are the elders that help kind of work as a jury, and then the community comes together, right? That's the whole point of stoning. You don't just have one person repeatedly throw rocks at somebody. It's the community comes out and gathers stones and throw rocks. And there are a couple things, number one, it speaks that the whole community is responsible for bringing justice and punishment, not the individual. And number two, I believe Absalom has guilt for killing his brother. The act of taking a human life is traumatic to the person who takes the life. If it's not traumatic, then the person is a psychopath. The person is a dangerous human being, right? That ought not to be walking around with other human beings. So when the community came together to throw the stones, nobody knows who killed the person, with the victor, the criminal being punished. Nobody really knows who did it. We all threw the stones. There's a sense of guilt passes off of me, and it's on the community. You can step back, even though it's certainly far more engaged than we want to be. But I've also heard that even in prisons, there is not one lever that's pulled when executions are practiced. I've heard that, but that in some prisons there are a couple levers. So nobody knows which lever was active. You all pull them at the same time. Because even being an executioner, right? I couldn't. Could you imagine doing that job? I mean, you get me into a ragey passion, I could do all sorts of stuff, I imagine. But just sit there going, okay, yeah, this guy's a felon and he's been nasty and naughty and all that. All right, good. And move on to the next. I couldn't do that. That's really wild stuff. So it's the community that does it. So Absalom has to be racked with guilt. And what will guilt do when it festers inside of you? So he's basically, right, he rings Joab's doorbell a couple times, right? And Joab doesn't answer the door. And so finally he says, all right, throw a rock through the window. Maybe he'll come out then, right? It sends his servants to go speak to Joab. Joab won't answer. Nah, we're going to burn his barley field. No beer for him, no bread. Burn his barley field. Now he comes to talk to me. And Absalom wants to go before his father. So the other question I have is, why do you think we get this physical description of Absalom here? Why didn't we get it back when we learned about Tamar? Jim?
I'm not really sure.
Focuses on Tamar, sure. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now it's purely focused on Absalom.
Mm-hmm.
And this may be way off base, and it's very, very symbolic, but so often the presence of evil is beautiful looking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. There's that symbolic nature that the presence of evil is often beautiful. I think actually Absalom does turn evil. I don't think he started out that way. His bitter. Oh, that could tie into the sermon. His bitterness, his guilt, his anger at himself, his anger at his father. We're getting set up here. Yes. So picture this guy that gets described. From the sole of the foot to the top of his head, not a blemish on him. When he cuts his hair, it weighs it weighs 200 shekels, right? Every year. So 1 shekel is 2/5 of an ounce. So when look at us all doing that math. 200 shekels. That's 400/5 of an ounce. So then we can divide that by 5 and we get 80 ounces. 16 ounces in a pound, right? So we're looking at almost 5 pounds of hair. Is my math right? Yeah. Brock says yes. Other people are going, I don't know. Other people are like, I don't know. You lost me at 2/5 of an ounce. Yeah. 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 Holy cow. Yeah. So that was very long hair. And so he's doing this every year. Deb, we're right up in your alley now as a professional. Is that a lot of hair for a year? Right. And so at half an inch a month, how much hair would you have to weigh like 5 pounds? Quite a bit. This guy had hair. Well, I'm thinking it must be thick, right? Like a crazy hair, this guy. So he's like Serge, right? That's what I'm getting here is Serge, not a blemish, beautiful hair. He's and so we get set up like this 3 times in the book of in 1st and 2nd Samuel. The first time we're told that the man was handsome and he was a head taller than anybody else around him. Anybody remember who that might be? I'm sorry? King Saul. King Saul. Just before he is anointed as king, he's introduced to us as this handsome man who's a head taller than everybody else around him. Just the guy you'd want for king, right? When we meet David, he's described to us as ruddy and handsome, right? He's got this kind of outdoor look, nice looking guy. And now we meet Absalom, who's like gorgeous, I mean, I'd look at him. And why is he getting set up for us like this? It's as if you consider those other two, this looks like he's going to give a shot at running for king, right, so to speak, take a run for it. And so we know that Absalom's been 5 years separated from his father, 2 years under house arrest, 7 years since the rape of Tamar, an enormous amount of time. Or you could multiply that out, 35 pounds of hair, right, that he's cut and left in various places. So let's go over and take a peek at 2 Samuel 15, 1-12. After this, Absalom got himself a chariot and horses and 50 men to run before him. And Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the way of the gate. And when any man had a dispute to come before the king for judgment, Absalom would cry to him and say, "From what city are you?" And when he said, "Your servant is of such and such a tribe in Israel," Absalom would say to him, "See, your claims are good and right, but there is no man designated by the king to hear you." Then Absalom would say, "Oh, that I were judge in the land. Then every man with a dispute or cause might come to me, and I would give him justice." And whenever a man came near to pay homage to him, he would put out his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. Thus Absalom did to all of Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. At the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Please let me go and pay my vow, which I have vowed to the Lord in Hebron. For your servant vowed a vow while I lived in Geshur in Aram, saying, if the Lord will indeed bring me back to Jerusalem, then I will offer worship to the Lord." The king said to him, "Go in peace." So he rose and went to Hebron. But Absalom sent secret messengers throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then say, 'Absalom is king at Hebron.'" When with Absalom went 200 men from Jerusalem who were invited guests, and they went in their innocence and knew nothing. And while Absalom was offering the sacrifice, he sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor from his city in Gilo. And the conspiracy grew strong, and the people with Absalom kept increasing. So, what does Absalom do in verses 1-6? Well, before he gathers up the small army, what's he doing right in verses 1-6? Getting people's trust. Why? Or for what? Justice. If my father cannot give justice in his own house, how can he bring justice to the land? The king's job was to bring justice. It was like to protect the people from outside influences, right? Army and whatnot, but also to bring justice. If he can't bring justice in his own house, how can he bring it in the whole land? And so is a popular, fairly popular psychologist and speaker that I like to listen to, and he's a little bit hard edged sometimes. He just says things flat out, which I think I kind of appreciate, and kind of just I goes with how I am sometimes. But he wrote his name's Jordan Peterson, and he converted himself to Christianity within like the last 2 years or so. And I say converted himself because he was very, very sick. He had no outside influence. He'd been teaching the Bible as literature. He spent a lot of time in the Bible, well, not as literature, but it's kind of like teaching the Bible to pull out archetypes to teach people about psychology. And all that time in the Bible ultimately led him to committing himself to Christ. So it's really pretty neat. So he said, he wrote a book maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and in that book, it's called 12 Rules for Life. In that book, one of his rules is it's either clean your room or make your bed. I think it's clean your room. And his point is not that everybody has to have a pristine bedroom, but his point is, if you cannot have a clean bedroom, how can you go out and tell other people how to run their life? Right? It's very much like David here, right? If it not all, I mean, some of us are a little cluttered, me included, right? We're a little cluttered, but we know where stuff is. We all have different levels of cleanliness. But if you're not like changing your sheets and doing your laundry and vacuuming and stuff like that, you might need to work on your stuff at home before you go and work on somebody else's stuff. This is Absalom's challenge of David. It's now been 11 years in total since my sister was raped. Justice was never brought to my brother. And so I took justice into my own hands and I killed him, or had him killed. And now it's been, well, maybe it's been another 4 years, well, 6 years since, I don't know how long, I've lost track. So it's 9 years since then, and nothing has happened to me. Except, oh yeah, my dad wouldn't visit me at my house. And when I went to see him, he came down off the throne and he kissed me like I'd never done anything wrong. Oh, that there were a man who would bring justice to Israel. Right? Plus, he's super good looking. Right? Like this guy is described, he's just gorgeous. He's the guy you want to look to, the guy you want to look at. And then when somebody comes up to pay homage to him, he takes the person by the hand and kisses him. Right? Pretty astounding. And he does that for 4 years with anybody who comes into Jerusalem with to seek the king's audience to bring justice. So the first person they meet at the city gate is Absalom, assuming they get into meet the king or with one of the king's counselors or judges or whomever, however he deals with the responsibility. The first person they meet is Absalom. And if they receive justice, here's this guy at the gate, right, that agrees that, man, justice should be done. If they do not receive what they believe they should receive in justice, Absalom won their heart as they walked through the gate, right? And he's like, oh, yeah, I wish there were people to listen to let's just listen to you. And through that sort of political deception, right, he gains everybody's heart. So why does Absalom lead a revolt against his father, against David? He wants to be the king that gives justice. Why do you think the revolt, like people gather to him? Why do people gather? There could be some chatter, right? Look at what Joab did. Look at what happened in David's own house. Stuff's not getting taken care of. If it's not getting taken care of up there, Janice? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absalom is beautiful to look at and promises them justice. I want to be on Absalom's side. There's a reason why in high school the captains of the sports teams are pretty often good-looking people. There's a reason. They may be excellent athletes, but they attract people to them also because of how they look. And if you can get that combo, people are going to follow your team captain. People are going to follow your uh, class representative or school president or whatever. How, Jen?
Nixon versus Kennedy was the first one televised.
Mm-hmm.
And there are political influencers who say that Kennedy won because he was better looking on
Yep.
TV.
Yep, there was Janice is remarking back to the 60s when Kennedy and Nixon were running against one another, and it was the first time the debates were televised. And I remember hearing these accounts as well. Kennedy had a whole makeup group with him that made him look nice. Nixon did not. He just got up there to speak, and Nixon, by the end of the day, had a good 5 o'clock shadow going, and no makeup. You know, he looked like a ruddy old man. And Kennedy was a good-looking guy. Many people believe that Kennedy won not based on principle, but on his looks. And I think we can tend to see that. How often do we elect a hideously ugly person to government? Right? Most of the people in government are, say, average to better, or they've been in there long enough. We're not going to get them out. That interesting? What have we done? Let's go read now 2 Samuel 15, 13 to 17. And a messenger came to David, saying, the hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom. Oh, also, why did Absalom go to Hebron? It's not a question in here, but I wanted to ask it. Why did Absalom go to Hebron? So, yeah, he wants to be king there first. It's a good place to be. David was anointed king in Hebron. So Hebron is already a fortified city, because David was king there while he was king over Judah. And there was war back and forth between Judah and the other 11 tribes at the time, back and forth. So Hebron is a fortified city. Bang, go take advantage of the fortifications Dad used. Dad's a good general. Goes there. Verse 14. Then David said to all of his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, arise and let us flee, or else there will be no escape for us from Absalom. Go quickly, lest he overtake us quickly and bring down ruin on us and strike the city with the edge of the sword. And the king's servants said to the king, behold, your servants are ready to do whatever my lord the king decides. So the king went out, and all his household after him. And the king left, we read this passage before, the king left 10 concubines to keep the house. And the king went out, and all the people after him, and they halted at the last house. Verse 17, good. So why does David flee? Fear. Fear of Absalom, and ultimately, what does standing his ground mean? Not sure about guilty. He's going to have to fight who? Which would mean, wouldn't that be like holding him accountable? Right? Standing his ground and saying, no, I'm the king, and you are being a rebel, would mean that David would have to hold his son accountable. And David is hesitant to do that. After that, there are a whole bunch of different groups. That's kind of a long list of different groups of people that are with David and who follows him, and some other things that go on, and a little bit of subterfuge that David works out. Now let's pop over to chapter 18. Verses 1 through, am I missing something? What am I missing here? Did I put it somewhere else? One second. I'm sorry. Oh, okay, we're good. All right, I did move it somewhere else. Never mind. We're okay. All right, so chapter 18, verses 1 through 5. So obviously a lot happens for a couple chapters. It says, then David mustered the men who were with him and set over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. And David sent out the army, 1/3 under the command of Joab, 1/3 under the command of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the command of Ittai the Gittite. And the king said to the men, I myself will also go out with you. But the men said, you shall not go out, for if we flee, they will not care about us. If half of us die, they would not care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us. Therefore it is better that you send us help from the city. The king said to them, whatever seems best to you, I will do. So the king stood at the side of the gate while all of the army marched out by hundreds and by thousands. And the king ordered Joab and Abishai and Ittai, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave orders to all the commanders about Absalom. So what happens in verses 1 through 5? Sort of what has changed? Right. He's going to go back and take Jerusalem. We know something has changed. I haven't let you in entirely on it yet. But obviously, David has gotten to the point where he can't run anymore. Something has happened. And now he's going to go and hold his son accountable. But what? Deal gently with the rebellious, fratricidal insurrectionist, right, son of mine. I mean, this is like treason on the highest level. And David says, deal gently. Isn't that a little shocking? I mean, even for, it's his own son, so I'm like, right? But by this point, we're talking years of division in the family. Years upon years. Over a decade of division. Where did I go? Oh, there I am. So now let's look at verses 6 through 18. So the army went out into the field against Israel, and the battle was fought in the forest of Ephraim. And the men of Israel were defeated there by the servants of David, and the loss there was great on that day, 20,000 men. The battle spread over the face of all the country, and the forest devoured more people that day than the sword. And Absalom happened to meet the servants of David. Absalom was riding on his mule, and the mule went under the thick branches of a great oak. And his head caught fast in the oak, and he was suspended between heaven and earth, while the mule that was under him went on. And a certain man saw it and told Joab, "Behold, I saw Absalom hanging in an oak." Joab said to the man who told him, What? You saw him? Why then did you not strike him there to the ground? I would have been glad to give you 10 pieces of silver and a belt." But the man said to Joab, "Even if I had felt in my hand the weight of 1,000 pieces of silver, I would not reach out my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing, the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, for my sake, protect the young man Absalom. On the other hand, if I had dealt treacherously against his life, and there is nothing hidden from the king, then you yourself would have stood aloof." Joab said, "I will not waste time like this with you." And he took 3 javelins in his hand and thrust them into the heart of Absalom while he was still alive in the oak. And 10 young men, Joab's armor bearers, surrounded Absalom and struck him and killed him. Then Joab, go to 18, right? Yep. Then Joab blew the trumpet, and the troops came back from pursuing Israel, for Joab restrained them. And they took Absalom and threw him into a great pit in the forest, and raised over him a very great heap of stones. And all Israel fled, everyone to his own home. Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up for himself the pillar that is in the king's valley, for he said, "I have no son to keep my name in remembrance." He called the pillar after his own name, and it's called Absalom's monument to this day. All right. So what happens to Absalom? I'm sorry? He gets killed by Joab as a result of what? Getting caught in the tree by his big hair, right? Dude should have been thinking, if I can't put a helmet on it, I might want to trim it so I can put a helmet on, because helmets are good safety, right? We all wear them on bicycles and skiing and all kinds of stuff. Not when you're riding on a mule, I guess. People do it now when they ride on a horse. Apparently on a mule, good idea too. So he gets hung up in the tree by his hair. Why does the soldier neither harm nor help Absalom? We're going to do some interesting theology here in a second. He doesn't harm him because of fear of the king, right? Why doesn't he help him? Fear of Joab, maybe, right? Okay. Oh, if I help him, Joab's going to be mad at me. If I kill king is going to be mad at me. I'm up the creek. No matter what I do is wrong. I'm just going to go tell Joab. How did Abraham know that the ram that he saw was supposed to be killed instead of his son? Well, besides God's word. Remember when Abraham is going to sacrifice Isaac? And the angel of the Lord shows up and says, "No, no, no. Don't sacrifice him. I know now that you trust me." And then Abraham looks up and he sees a ram caught in a thicket. Right? He knows that that ram is for sacrifice. Why? Certainly provided. If you have a person who is guilty of multiple capital crimes and you've killed him once, what are you supposed to do? You can't kill him a second time, right? No matter how hard you try, you can't kill him a second time. Does anybody remember? I know I've talked about this, not in this lesson, but quite a lot. I bring it up. You leave him hanging from a tree. Yes, Joy, right on. You hang him from a tree, because a person hanging from a tree is it's a sign to God that this person needs more punishment in the afterlife. A person hanging from a tree or a cross, right? The cross is symbolic of a tree. The people of Israel, when they saw people crucified, they saw that just like hanging a person from a tree. It was the same thing to them. For people of Israel, that's why crucifixion was so horrible, because for them, it was a sign to God that this person needed to be continuously punished in the afterlife. They didn't have a huge theology of the afterlife like we have. And so, Jesus hanging from the cross is our theology is the teaching in the Bible is Jesus became the sin of the world. He literally became the sin of the world, but he's only crucified once. He's only hung from the tree once. He's only put to death once. Well, he's put to death on a cross as a symbol to God of the great punishment that he needs to come under for our salvation. This soldier comes up and he finds the king's son hanging from a tree by his hair. And he knows that God has said by those events, because God is sovereign, God is in control, there are no accidents, there are no coincidences. God has said, this man deserves death. But the poor soldier says, I may obey God, but then I defy the king. Or I defy the king and I obey the general. I can't win. So he goes, he doesn't know what to do. He goes and reports it to Joab. And then Joab goes and takes matters into his own hands, which we know Joab does. And he kills somebody, which we know Joab does, right? Like those are Joab's things. Interesting, neat. That hanging from a tree thing, I think it pops up a few times in the Bible, and when it happens, it's something to take a look at. So then we see that Joab goes. First, he stabs him in the heart. It says he stabs him in the heart with 3 javelins, and then he has 10 of his other young men kill him. So I'm thinking the javelins ought to have done the job, but they must mutilate. It must be about mutilating him. The Jews, I think, to mutilate him before they put him in the ground was to kind of exact some revenge on him. Well, look at us going on to our last page. All right, let's take a look at 2 Samuel 18, 31 to 33. So 2 people get sent to bring information to David. And it says, and behold, the Cushite came, and the Cushite said, good news for my lord the king. For the Lord has delivered you this day from the hand of all who rose up against you. The king said to the Cushite, is it well with the young man Absalom? And the Cushite answered, may the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up against you for evil be like that young man. And the king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said, oh, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son. What is David's response? Yeah. David's in an impossible position, right? Now David's lost 2 sons, both tragically, both horribly. And what's worse? What's the worst part of it? Mm-hmm. He could have prevented both deaths. He could have at least prevented one. David's still alive to see his sons die. 3? Oh, and the baby. Right. That's right. Bathsheba's baby as well. The baby had the first one with Bathsheba. So we're going to come back. We'll come back around to the why David is so upset. All right, we're going to jump ahead a little bit. We're going to, well, not that far ahead. We're going to go to 2 Samuel 19, verses 11 through 13. Yep. And King David sent this message to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. Say to the elders of Judah, why should you be the last to bring the king back to his house? When the word of all Israel has come to the king, you are my brothers, you are my bone and my flesh. Why then should you be the last to bring back the king? And say to Amasa, are you not my bone and my flesh? God do to me, and more so, if you are not commander of the army from now on in place of Joab. And he swayed the heart of all the men of Judah as one man, so that they sent word to the king, return both you and all your servants. So the king came back to the Jordan and Judah came to Gilgal to meet the king and to bring the king over to the Jordan. So what does David do? I went a little too far. What does David do in verses 11 through 13? Where was that passage? Should have marked that. He sends a message to the people of Judah. Right. And so I just want to give us a quick reminder. I think it's 1 Chronicles 11. And who does he replace him with? Amasa. And who is Amasa? Anybody remember? I'm trying to find my reference. I did not mark it as clearly as I wanted to. Amasa has been introduced to us before. And Amasa, doggone it. Well, now I wish I had marked it better. Amasa is David's nephew, Joab is David's cousin, and so is Amasa. I'm sorry? Cousin, yeah. They're both close family. So David replaces his cousin with another cousin to take over the army. Why? Anybody remember what Joab's been up to? Joab said, nope, I'm going to pick the right person. Eventually I'll get the right name. David said, don't kill Absalom. Joab kills Absalom. Before that, back when David was first becoming king in over the whole land, Abner, who had been Saul's general, came to David to make a treaty. Joab had been in battle against Abner, and Abner had killed Joab's younger brother. Remember? And so then after Abner had left, Joab called Abner back and killed Abner in the middle of peace talks. Killed him. And what did David do? Nothing. And what did David do after Joab kills Absalom. Almost nothing. This time, he demotes him. Once the dust is all settled, he says, okay, now we're going to have Amasa be in charge. Or did you say Amasa? That sounds more correct. Amasa. All right. So then we get this. There's this as David is preparing to return Jerusalem, led by the people of Judah. There is a rebellion led by a man named Sheba, who convinces the rest of Israel to follow him. It literally just like pops right up. There's obviously a lot of unrest in the country, and so we're going to just pop over to chapter 20, verses 4 to 13. Whoops, I'm in the wrong book. I'm way in the wrong spot. There we go. 4 to 13. 20. My goodness, I'm having real trouble now. Then the king said to Amasa, this is chapter 20, verse 4. Then the king said to Amasa, call the men of Judah together to me within 3 days and be here yourself. So Amasa went to summon Judah, but he delayed beyond the set time that had been appointed him. And David said to Abishai, so Abishai is Joab's brother. Now Sheba, the son of Bichri, will do us more harm than Absalom. Take your Lord's servants and pursue him, lest he get himself to fortified cities and escape from us. And there went out after Joab's men and the Cherethites, the Pelethites, and all the mighty men. They went out from Jerusalem to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri. When they were at the great stone that is at Gibeon, Amasa came to meet them. Now Joab was wearing a soldier's garment, and over it was a belt with a sword in its sheath fastened at his thigh. And he went forward, and it fell out. And Joab said to Amasa, is it well with you, my brother? And Joab took Amasa by the beard with his right hand to kiss him. But Amasa did not observe that the sword was in Joab's hand. So Joab struck him with it in the stomach and spilled the entrails to the ground without striking a second blow, and he died. How far am I going? Verse 12. Then Joab and Abishai his brother pursued Sheba the son of Bichri, and one of Joab's young men took his stand by Amasa and said, whoever favors Joab and whoever is for David, let him follow Joab. And Amasa lay wallowing in his blood in the highway, and anyone who came by, seeing him, stopped. And when the man saw that all the people stopped, he carried Amasa out of the highway into the field and threw a garment over him. So we'll end that a little bit there. I guess I do go through 13, not through 12. Am I in the right spot? Yeah, 13. So verse 13 said, when he was taken out of the highway, all the people went on after Joab to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri. So what does Joab do? He kills again. Almost the exact same way. If you remember how he killed Abner, very similar, right? It looks like I'm coming to greet you, but instead I run you through. It's not like let's fight to be general. Like let's fight for it. It's just outright murder, and it's deceptive. There's trickery involved. There's planning involved, and Amasa is not like it's not like he's some guy he didn't know, right? His mom and Amasa's dad, I think, were siblings. Just like David was David's father, Jesse, was sibling. Oh, wait, I think. Oh, maybe Joab is his nephew. David's nephew. I get a little confused in my head. But in any case, they're close relatives, right? They're not supposed to have a relationship like this. So once again, we see Joab strike. I tend to think that what Joab does, he does thinking he's doing for the good of David. Like he's doing the stuff for David that David can't do. But once again, like with Absalom, David's not going to hold him accountable, so I'll hold him accountable. Right? Like Absalom holding Amnon accountable. 2 wrongs don't make a right, and a greater wrong certainly does not correct another wrong. I think we'll stop right there before we trudge into this last little bit. But we're going to finish this section up. I think we'll finish this up next week. And then I think we're going to take a little peek at some of the prophets and overcoming, and take a look at how they overcome struggles, and then move on into the New Testament as we get ready to close out the year. So let's take just a moment and close in prayer. Father, thank you very much for today. Thank you, Lord, for your love for us, for your goodness, and for your kindness. We ask, God, that you'd place your hands upon us today, that you'd help us to stand aside from our burdens, from our weaknesses, not hold on to them. And Lord, therefore, allow you to overcome. We bless you in Jesus' name. Amen.